Hello everyone and welcome to Luminar Coffee Break. I'm Angela Andrieux and today we're going to be talking about HDR and exposure blending. I'm going to be starting from Lightroom, which is my personal workflow, and taking those images, a set of bracketed images, to Aurora HDR to merge them together, then back to Lightroom, and then over to Luminar AI for my creative edits. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. I want to take a moment to say hello to Julie. Thanks so much for joining me today. Up on the screen, I have a photo that I captured early last year at Joshua Tree National Park. And inside this vast desert national park, there's this one area that has a dam, and at the time it had a fair amount of water in it. So we were able to get up really early one morning and get some beautiful reflections, some great clouds. It was an awesome experience. I was out there with my camera club and we had a fabulous time. So let me show you my original series of images here. Here's my middle exposure. And then it goes to my darkest, next one up, and I bracketed 5 images. And there's the absolute brightest. Now I did a couple of experiments to see which brackets I should use. And when I choose my brackets to use in processing in HDR, I like to keep a look on my histogram here. So I can see that on this one, the very brightest, my histogram is slammed up to the right. Now if I go back one step, my histogram's a little bit more spread out, and we're barely not touching the left side of the histogram. In looking at this, I think this is probably where I'm going to want to start and then move to my darker exposures. Now, if I go look at my darkest exposure, I can see that I'm not touching the right of the histogram, and that's exactly what I want. Now, when I first processed this, I processed from my middle exposure to the second brightest. And I did these 4 exposures. Like I said, I think this other one is far too bright. It's slammed to the right and it actually would give me poor results. When you add in an exposure that is so overexposed, it actually is going to make the other pixels have to kind of compensate for over brightness, and you're going to end up with more artifacts, and you're not going to bring back all that color and depth that you really probably want in your HDR photo. So my first round was to process these 4, and this was the result that I got. It's really nice, but it's a little bit flat and it's a little bit bright. So instead, I took my middle exposure and these 2 darkest exposures, and I put those 3 together, and this is what I got. So I like this result a lot better than this. It gives me a better starting point. It has more depth, it has more detail, and there's nothing blown out of it. If you look here at our histogram, it's not quite touching the right. It's barely touching the left, and anywhere where we're losing shadow detail, it's really minimal because there's nothing in this image that I can see really being blocked. I want to take a moment here to pop over to the comments and say hello to Russ, Steven, JGmail28, Pat, Rima, I think, Rimal, and Tom. So glad you guys are able to see us today. All right, let me see if there's any questions. Julie says, can you use Luminar to change the exposures and then do Aurora to blend them together? It doesn't really matter if you're using raw files. If you're throwing the raw files at Aurora, you have all of the data. You can go in and manually kind of change what values are being shown, but if you use the entire raw file, all of that data is there anyway, and there's no need to really do that. I've never really had better results by kind of faking the HDR process, and let's take even a single image, make 2 copies of it, make one a stop darker, make one a stop lighter, and then merge them. I don't find that I get any better results from that than I do just processing that single image. So I hope that's helpful. Hello, Kat. Glad you're able to be here today. All right, and Tom says, what is your EV delta between exposures? On these ones, I believe I'm at 1.7 EV spacing, and I did 5 exposures automatically bracketed. All right, so I'm gonna go here to my 3 darkest exposures. Go ahead and select those 3 here in Lightroom, here in my film strip. And then I'm gonna go ahead and right click on that series of images, go to export, and then I'm gonna go all the way up here to Aurora HDR, and I'm gonna open my source files. Now I didn't make any changes to these files in Lightroom, so I'm gonna go ahead and take those source images and let Aurora HDR do my raw conversion. So here we go. Here's my 0 EV, and then we have the 1.7 and the negative 3.3. So hopefully that answers your question, Tom. I always click auto alignment, even when I'm shooting on a tripod. And the reason for that is there's any number of things that, especially in longer exposures, that can make a little bit of camera shake and degrade the quality of your final image. Anything from the movement of the shutter inside of your camera to a slight gust of wind to, maybe you tap the tripod on accident. So always click the auto alignment. It takes a little bit longer to process, but the results are always better. I then go into the gear icon over here, and I have to make a judgment call whether or not I'm going to use ghost reduction. For this image, we did have some clouds here in the sky. We had water. There was a tiny breeze. There might have even been a little bit of movement in the brush. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my ghost reduction to make sure all of those elements stay sharp. But because there wasn't a lot of movement, I'm going to move this to low. And I always recommend setting your ghost reduction setting at the lowest possible setting. Try it on low, zoom into those details. If you still have some movement between the frames that's visible, then go ahead and cancel out and go back and use a higher amount. The reason I say that is because on any given picture, the higher the amount of ghost reduction, the higher the chances of having artifacts later on in your processing. So make sure you keep that amount as low as possible. If you don't need it, just keep it turned off. But if you have movement that you don't want to have there, go ahead and turn it on and use it at low. I also keep my color denoise turned on and enable my chromatic aberration reduction. Now I'm going to go ahead and click Create HDR. And because I clicked all of those options, it can take a little bit longer to process. But for me, it feels like it's worth it to have a better quality end result, to take a little bit more time with it than to choose the faster route and have the possibility of having to go back and redo things all over again because I didn't pay attention and I was trying to be quick and ended up with artifacts in my scene. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here at the comments. Ramal is saying, I like the new 1.01 release. Awesome. I haven't actually installed it yet. I've seen it in use, but haven't installed it yet. I actually plan to do that after today's session. So I'm glad to hear you're liking it. It's working out well for you. For those of you who are wondering what that's all about, Luminar 1.0.1 is in the process of being released right now. Some countries have gotten it now, and it'll be rolled out over the next several days so as not to slam our servers, and everyone should have it by Monday. So we'll be showing more of that over the next couple of weeks. And there's a few small changes. There's a couple of changes to the layout of the Edit tab and a few other under the hood. I think something like 77 bug fixes. So lots of good stuff. But as far as your daily workflow, it's not going to be that different. But that is a great update, and thank you guys for pointing that out. And Pat is asking, why do I do export rather than edit in? I would say you could do either one. I choose export because it's the most reliable way. There are some users who have reported issues using edit in. Most of those users are on Windows, and the workaround or the solution for that is to use export. And that just is a really solid way, works every time. Sometimes people will get into either Aurora or Luminar and find that these apply and cancel buttons are missing. If that's happening when you're using edit in, go ahead and do it from export instead. Everything should work fine. And I demo that because that is the most reliable way to use it. So hopefully that answers that question. Julie's also asking, what are artifacts? So artifacts are when you're processing and you bring out noise. You can get halos. Sometimes you get banding, like lines through the sky and wide open areas. It's just kind of those undesirable things that can happen to a photo when you overprocess it. So when you're doing HDR is a pretty heavy lifting process, and it's really easy to take over the top, and artifacts are they're frequent, and you just have to watch for them and know the tools to make sure you minimize them and keep them out of your photos as much as possible. All right, so now we have our 3 brackets loaded here in Aurora. Now we have a bunch of tools over here on the right that you could use, but I like to do my creative editing in Luminar because it has pretty much all of these same tools plus a lot more. So I'm going to go ahead and just click apply and take my merged image back to Lightroom, and then we'll jump over to Luminar. So you'll see by clicking apply, I'm back here in Lightroom, and here is my merged image. Now I'm going to go ahead and right click on this again, go to export, and in this case, I'm going to go up here to Luminar AI and open my source files. If after going to Aurora HDR, you made a couple of changes in Lightroom, you'd then want to use the edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments instead. So I'm going to go ahead and open my source files since I didn't make any extra changes and let that open up. All right, and Russ is saying he's just checked and there's no update yet in Florida. Yeah, I don't think the US is rolling out until closer to Monday, so something to keep in mind. Okay, so now we've got Luminar AI open up to our templates. Let's go ahead and move over to the scenery grouping here and to one of my favorites here, Fast Fix. Now, I like this, but I feel like the color almost went a little bit over the top. Let's take a look and see what other options we have here. Well, I don't really care for that. I like my original sky better. Simple looks really nice. Clear skies looks good. I like that because it adds a little bit of depth and contrast that wasn't there before. So let's go ahead and take a look at our before and our after. That's immediately improved in my opinion. And if you like that, you can go ahead and stop there. If you like this, but you feel like it's a little bit too much, keep in mind, you can go down to the bottom and pull back on that overall amount slider here at the bottom. But I like to play a little bit more and get creative. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the Edit tab. And let's see what else we can do. Now I'm looking at this and I feel like this section of the blue sky is a little bit too blue. So a lot of times when that happens, I can go here to the Enhance AI. I see that the AI Sky Enhancer is on. I'm actually going to pull that back, and that's going to pull away some of that super concentrated blue saturation. I think that looks better already. Now let's see here. We can usually go to structure. Structure has already been added, and that's kind of the beauty of one of the things that added some of that additional mid-tone contrast to our image, and that was by virtue of just clicking that template. I think that looks pretty good. Let's take a look and see what was done in details. I might pull back a little bit on the small details just because I feel like it got a little bit too, not quite crunchy, but on the borderline of crunchy. And structure and small details, especially with HDR, is something you need to watch for. It's one of those things that you can easily take overboard and make the texture look unnatural. So I'm going to pull that back quite a bit. And I think that's a little bit better. Now I'm going to go back up here to Composition AI and let's see if we can crop this and make this a better result. Let's go ahead and click on Composition AI and see what it suggests. Now taking in what it recommended here, I'm not fond of that crop at all. If I go ahead and reset that and I take in the image with my own eyes, I'm finding that there's a lot of space over here on the right that's not really adding much to the image, and maybe even a touch here in the foreground. But for the most part, I really want to focus in on this like lovely S-curve of the water here. So instead of cropping it with Composition AI, I'm going to change my ratio to a 4:5 and then move that over a little bit. And now we've cut off a little bit of the extra brush and such over here on the right. I'm going to go ahead and hit return on my keyboard. And I like that crop much better. All right. Now, the final thing I want to do here is, like I said, I want to emphasize this beautiful S-curve we have in the water. And I feel like some of these rocks here in the foreground and up here on the left and maybe up here on the right are just a tiny bit too bright, and they draw your eye out as opposed to in. So I'm going to do some dodging and burning using my local masking tool. I'm going to go ahead and click Add and Basic. And now I'm going to pull my exposure down, and this is going to affect the image globally initially, but I'm paying attention to how all of those rocks look. So we can pull that down maybe right about there, and then we're in the paint mask. We grab our brush. I'm going to pull that opacity down to about 60%, and then make my brush size bigger using the bracket key on my keyboard, and just start brushing that in lightly over some of these rocks just to tone some stuff down and really draw my viewer through the photo. Maybe pull that down a little bit more over there. All right, that looks really, really good. Now the final thing I want to do is go back to my essentials and let's add a nice soft vignette. I'm going to go ahead and pull my amount slider down to -100. I'm going to go into my advanced settings, pull that feather up really high. I'm going to use maybe a tiny bit of inner light, not a whole lot, and then click on choose subject, and I'm going to actually, so our default is right here in the middle, so I'm going to actually pull that down just a little bit, be right about there, and then grab my amount slider and pull that back up and adjust that to the point where I think it looks good, it looks natural, and it really accentuates that S-curve of the water, and it draws us through the image. Let's take a look at our before. Oops, I need to click out of that choose subject. I do that almost every time. All right, so now let's take a look at our before. Nice image, a little bit flat, and our after. It's just added some depth and helped guide us through the image, so those creative edits really have the potential to make your image more powerful and more compelling. From there, I can click apply, and that will take me back to Lightroom. Give it just a moment here to process. All right. And there we have it. There's our finished image, and it looks gorgeous. And we were able to take fairly quickly from 3 exposures here, whittled down from 5, and come to this result. It looks beautiful, and I love how this image turned out. I hope you guys like it too. Let me take a look here at the comments, make sure there's no other questions. All right. Looks good. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments, either here in the live show, or if you're watching this after the fact, make sure you leave those comments below, and we definitely take a look and answer those and try to be as helpful as we can. Excuse me. If you guys like these shows, make sure you give us a thumbs up, and let us know what you want to learn about next. With that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Vanelli and I will both be with you tomorrow for our weekly wrap-up to kind of go over all of the things we talked about this week. With that, I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye, everyone.